It's after 5, so I'll go ahead and get started, and then if anybody wants to jump on, then they certainly can. And if you have questions along the way, we have a lot of information. A lot of it is sort of technical information that I'm not going to go into much today. We're going to have Eva Chen, who is the executive director of Solve FSHD, as our guest next month, and she might go into more of that. But we just wanted to update the parents. We got back from our summit that was September 27th, 28th, and we just wanted to update you from all the outcomes from that, and then we'll follow up again in November with Eva. So I do have some slides to share. We can get started. Let me see if I can share my screen. Got it. Sorry about that. It always does that to me. Okay, so let me give you a little background on how this all came about. So Kristen has been reaching out to a lot of different pharmaceuticals and just people in the space, trying to make them aware of who we are and what our chapter is trying to do. She had reached out to Solve FSHD for quite some time, and she never really got a reply. Part of it was Eva was just super busy getting everything up and running. And then the FSHD Society asked us to put together a video for the World Conference that was in Milan in the summer. And we did that. We put together a short video about our chapter and our kids and sort of what our goals were as a chapter, and that we needed to bring awareness to pediatric patients and get them in clinical trials as well as a non-ambulatory. Eva was at that conference. Kristen reached out to her again, sent her the video. She contacted us, and then we started having a dialogue with her in sort of normal meetings every couple of weeks, where myself, Kristen, and Debbie talked with Eva, and she came up with this plan to get a pediatric summit together. Solve FSHD funded it. They flew in biotech companies, some researchers, and the three of us to represent the parents. So we all went up to Northern California. It was very structured like a very business-like meeting. When we got there, we kind of introduced ourselves and our kids, and we gave a short presentation about what our kids had gone through and sort of the losses that they had faced and what we expected or we wanted from that community as far as getting our kids treatments before they lost mobility and before they became more severely affected. So we gave them that presentation, and then the next day we all kind of got together as a roundtable, and the pharmaceuticals sort of all presented on what their hopes were for entering pediatric trials, and the researchers presented on statistics surrounding pediatrics. So let me just go over a few of the things that we found out from that meeting. First of all, I just want to go over our mission again for our chapter. We're here, as we have been for almost 3 years now, to support, advocate, and bring trials and treatments to those living with FSHD, regardless of onset, severity, or ambulation. We've been beating that drum, and we've learned a lot over the last almost 3 years as far as the process for getting kids into clinical trials, and really just educating ourselves on the disease and also the clinical trial process, which is very complicated. So I think, and Kristen, jump in here whenever you feel like jumping in. So one of the biggest things, the most surprising thing that I got out of the summit initially was that the biotech companies really are interested in getting pediatrics in trials. It really is on their radar, and they really want to jump in and do that. There's just some barriers that they have that we as a community can help work through, so that we can get our kids into trials, and then also get treatments that are already in trials to our kids. And that's a big thing, and I'm going to talk about that. It's sort of a two-pronged approach. We want our kids into trials when they're young so that they can get this treatment before they even start having any loss. That's the ultimate goal. But for right now, there's some things we can do to get the treatments that are in trial right now for adults, to get that to filter down to our kids. So the first thing is safety for any kind of trial. Safety must be proven in adults before it can be tried on juveniles. If they want to go into trials for any kids under the age of 12, they have to do what's called a juvenile toxicology report, and basically they have to test the drug in a juvenile animal to make sure of the safety. But after they do that, they still have to get it into the adults and prove safety before it can be administered to any child under the age of 12, and really under the age of 18, but the juvenile toxicology is for 12 and under. So the biotech companies really are looking at this, and they're trying to find ways to get our kids into trials and to get treatments to our kids. One of the barriers is the lack of natural history. And natural history is just basically a fancy word for saying they need to, the community, the pharmaceuticals, the researchers, they have to prove how the disease progresses, right? So natural history is just, this is how the disease normally progresses. That way, when they have natural history and they say, if you're not taking any treatment, this is how the disease is likely to progress. Now, we all know FSHD is very variable. Not everybody progresses at the same time. But if they do a study, they can say, most likely without treatment, this is how a person or a child with FSHD would progress. The reason why that's important, so then if they get them in the trials, or if they get them on the drug, they can sort of compare, okay, now they're on this treatment, this is how they're progressing compared to if they weren't on the treatment. So natural history is very important to understand how to prove to the FDA that yes, this drug is effective. If they weren't on this drug, this is the losses they would incur over their lifetime or in the next several years. And now they're on this drug and they're not incurring those losses. So it proves to the FDA that yes, this drug is effective. So natural history is very important. There's very little natural history on pediatrics. So there's two types of natural history that I know of, and June, jump in if there's any other. There's the prospective, like the MOVE study, where you actually go in every year and they measure, or every increment, it could be every 6 months, every year, whatever, and they sort of measure how the disease is progressing. And then there's retrospective. That means taking what they already have, like from medical records, gathering that data, and then pulling all the information and mining that data out of it and saying, for the last 10 years, this is how the disease has progressed. Prospective takes time. You have to go there year after year, and they have to gather all the data, and it takes several years. If we can get a retrospective study of medical records of what's already happened with our kids, it will be much quicker. And I'm going to talk to you more about how parents can get involved and help with that, especially for parents who've had a child that they have years and years of medical records on them. So like for my son, I have 12 years of medical records on him of how he's progressed over the last 12 years. If they can take that data and several other kids or adults that may be adults now, how they progressed as a child, and pull that data out, it can expedite the natural history, which will help the pharmaceuticals. Any questions on that so far about natural history or the toxicology, or anything you want to add, June?
No, you covered it very, very well.
Okay. So the other thing that we learned, I've always heard since I've gotten into the FSHD world that pediatrics only accounts for maybe 10% of the population. And more data is coming out, and that's really not true. So the latest data and latest information we have that 40 to 50% of adults reported symptoms before the age of 18. So that's hugely different. Also, the latest data shows that of those early onset or childhood onset FSHD, quarter of them lose their ambulation before they're 18. So a quarter of those kids that are diagnosed are in wheelchairs before they're 18. And many of them are in then this is just anecdotal, around puberty, around 13, 14 years old. That's sort of when they start losing their mobility. Again, it's a variable disease. That's not always the case, but this is the latest data that we have. So we have ammunition for the biotech companies that is not such a small population, that if they do go into pediatric trials and if they do release their treatments to those under 18, there is a large population that would benefit from their treatment. The other thing that's kind of complicated that we talked about a lot at the summit were outcome measures. And outcome measures are just proof that the drug is working. So when they design a trial, they have to prove that the drug is working. There's a couple different ways you can do it. There's biomarkers as far as like maybe taking muscle biopsies and things like that, but that's not enough. It has to prove to the FDA that it's improving your quality of life. So I'm sure you guys are familiar with like reachable workspace and things like that. That is an outcome measure that if you take the drug, if you couldn't lift your arm this high and you're taking the drug and now you can lift it that high, that's an outcome that the drug is working. And they have a large variety of those measures that people have worked on to try and prove that, yes, the drug is effective. Well, they have those outcome measures nailed down pretty well for the adults. They don't have them modified and accommodated very well for the pediatrics yet. We are working on several initiatives to try, and so the Australian team is working on that. They need to be validated. There's also some video validation that we're going to look into so that it would prove that if they're on the drug, because again, the other thing I learned is a lot of these trials fail, not necessarily because the drug's not working, but they can't prove that the drug is working. And that's the thing. You might be taking a drug and you might be feeling better and you might be feeling like it's working, but if you can't prove scientifically that it's working, you can't take that to the FDA and say, I need to get this drug approved because it's working without the outcome measures. So that's a big thing that we're really working on with the pharmaceuticals and the researchers, and parents really are the best ones to be able to validate that. You know if your child's improving. Like every day, I know every day I look at my son and go, what else is failing? Like where else is he losing mobility? So if he started to improve, we would notice that right away, I think. So we can help that. And there's a lot of
Ellie, just to inject here. The other piece of that's going to be called on from parents is going to be more or less the FDA voice of the patient once we get there. We're not there yet, but we need to, as a community, band together and let the FDA know what is something that works. Because right now they're going to be looking for something monumental, like you can get up and walk. And for those in a wheelchair, that's not going to happen from a therapy overnight. So we need to tell them that just the fact of feeling better is actually something. You know, it's so minor that they're looking for this big thing, but we as a community, as a patient community, not just in the early onset, but for everyone with FSHD, the therapy just needs to, at minimum, just help you feel better and let them know that we're not looking for the silver bullet. We're just looking for some help so that when you go to do your workout, you can actually feel like you can maybe gain momentum when you're putting effort into exercise or trying to make yourself stronger in some way or gain some sort of mobility.
Right. And
June, anything to add there? Because I know that you've done a lot of work with the voice of the patient.
Yeah, I think it's how to translate what your subjective experience is into something that you can present in front of, into data, really. And I mean, the listening sessions, I think, are really a good way to provide more of the qualitative experience and get them to just be aware that there's this thing, there's FSHD and children are affected, and just how severe it is. I think those are the key things. And Allie and I were exchanging emails earlier today about, it's on our radar. It's a matter of timing. Like, when do we go before the FDA so that it's fresh in their minds when, like, the first drug comes before them or the first application to do a pediatric trial or whatever. we've got to think about what strategically makes the most sense. And yeah, and the only other thing I'd say is with the outcomes, it's interesting. There's so many people I talk to that say, I know that I'm not able to do something as well as I did 6 months ago, but their neurologist is saying like, oh, all these measures, manual muscle, that you look the same, you haven't changed. And so the problem is not that they're, that they're not willing to see it or whatever. I mean, the problem is that the tools that they're using just aren't able to pick up something that correlates with what the patient is experiencing, or your child is experiencing. So it's not easy to, I mean, it's like having a yardstick and you only have 1 inch measures, it's only ticked off every 1 inch, when a ½ inch would make a difference. But if you don't want to throw out something that gives you a ½ inch advantage just because your measuring stick wasn't marked off fine enough to pick up that change. That's kind of a more, an FSHD specific example is, okay, one of the outcomes that's really standard on a lot of muscle diseases is the 6-minute walk test. How far can you walk, right, in 6 minutes? Or how fast can you go 10 yards, or, the various variations of that. But that between, as your kid is walking, like there are changes that happen in their gait, like how all the adjustments they need to make in the body to keep propelling. But they might go the same distance, but they're working twice as hard to do it. So right now, the 6-minute walk is just too blunt a test. It's just not going to pick up changes that actually matter, like how much effort you have to put in, and maybe how painful it is, or whatever it is that's happening, and the tool doesn't pick it up. So the only way we'll get those tools is for people to like contribute their observations and knowledge and translate it into something that can be tested and measured. And as we say, validation is really important. You can't just go on anecdote. You've got to turn those personal experiences into actual, research questions, into experiments that can be tested and validated. If that makes sense.
Right.
And that's why participation is so important at every level. Like, you can't get to the goal without as many parents and families being involved and working together, and knowing what those goals should be, what our objectives are. So. Right.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, Kristen. Just small gains mean the world, or stopping progression and gaining. And the FDA really needs to hear that. And we're going to talk about the voice of the patient here in a little bit further. Thank you, June, too. So the last thing I really wanted to talk about before we start talking about community engagement was there's kind of what the real definition of off-label means. And Kristen and June, jump in here at any point. But basically, when a drug goes to trial, like right now, there's at least fulcrum and avidity. Fulcrum's in phase 3 trial, avidity's in phase 2 trial. They're right now only testing in that trial adults ages 18 to 65 that can walk. So if they prove that drug effective, they're only proving it effective for adults age 18 to 65 that can walk. So if they go to the FDA and they approve it, it may only be approved for adults age 18 to 65 that can walk, because that's the only population that it's been proved effective in. Now, there's a lot of talk around the community that even though if it gets approved, I can go to my doctor and I can take my 8-year-old kid or my 16-year-old kid or my non-ambulatory adult child, and the doctor will prescribe it to them. So if you can get a doctor to prescribe it to them, again, it's off-label, especially if it's in children and safety hasn't been proven, they may be very hesitant to do that. But if you can get a doctor to prescribe it off-label, insurance will not pay for it because it is not a proven effective drug for your population. And a lot of these treatments are very, very expensive. So let's say I'm just going to put myself in the situation. My son is 18, he's an adult, but he can't walk. So it hasn't been proven in a clinical trial that it's effective on him. I go to his doctor. If his doctor prescribes it to him, if I can get him to prescribe it to him, the insurance most likely will not pay for it. And then they'll say, okay, I'll prescribe this to your son if you can give me $100,000 a month, which again, I don't know how much the drug will be, but we all know drugs are very expensive. The most recent therapy for Duchenne's is 2.3 million. So if it's out of reach financially, then it's out of reach. So that's why the off-label is so important, that people need to understand that just because a treatment is blessed for a certain population, it doesn't mean that it's going to cover everybody if it's not labeled for those people. There's a couple things we're working on. One of them is expanded access, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But does anybody have questions about off-label, what off-label means? Because that seems to be a source within the community that people assume that if there's a treatment that they can get it regardless of their age or their ambulation status. Okay, so as June said, the patients make all the difference in the world. Every treatment for Duchenne's, SMA, all these other rare diseases, it all was pushed by the patient community. If we remain silent and we're not united and a loud vocal voice, and we're not motivated to get all these populations of non-ambulatory, the kids over 65, if we're not motivated and we don't let our voices be heard, they are going to fall through the cracks, or it's going to take a long time for them to get the treatment, longer than it should be. So what we need is for all the parents and all the patients and the FSHD community to come together, because again, it's not just about kids. It's not just about those who can't walk. It's not just about those who can walk. It's all of us. We're all in this together, and we need to come together as a community with one united voice and say, we need to cure this. We need to solve this for everybody. So what we need from the parents and the patients is we are working on some natural history and some outcomes that will be more sensitive, like June was saying, that don't measure an inch, that measure an 1/8 of an inch through videos and some AI, and surveys, things like that, patient reported things, but we need the community to respond. We need you to get engaged. We need you to, if we ask you to send a video, that you send a video, to video your kid or yourself, because lack of engagement creates a perception that we don't care, that it's not that big a deal, that our kids aren't suffering, that our non-ambulatory population isn't suffering, and that's not true. And we all know that's not true, but we need to make sure that they know it. When we were at the summit, they really listened to us. They really listened to the parents. And I think we really educated them. And when we showed that video of our kids talking and our kids, struggling to do things, they really paid attention. And it really puts a face to it. And it's more than just working in a lab, looking at something under a microscope. This is a child or someone who's really suffering. So we really need to get engaged. So we're asking you that when we put out surveys, if we ask you to submit something for a video, if we ask you to send your records because we want to do this retrospective study, please do it. Please participate and send those things so that we can help. What you contribute will help everybody. You're not only going to help your family member, but you'll help everybody in the FSHD community.
There's also, I'd like to add on to that. There's also a lack of pure definition of this disease in the community as well. So the researchers and, well, not as much the researchers as the pharmaceuticals are under the impression with all the documentation that's put out there that this is a mild effective disease, that you can live a normal life, everything's going to be just fine. You'll just have some minor inconveniences. And that's really, when you boil down to it, a lot of what the literature says. And so when we brought up to, even before this summit, when we brought up the pediatric and the non-ambulatory population of this community, the numbers that we were able to share with them, even pre this summit, were just brand new numbers that they'd never known. They did not even know we existed as a community. They thought that FSHD, and the majority of what they were solving was the ambulatory FSHD, not the non-ambulatory and not the kids. And so it's because we as parents have been so silent for so long, and we have not been talking to pharmaceuticals. We've not been talking to researchers. We've not let our voice united be heard. You know, look at these meetings. There's 8 of us tonight. This is one of the largest populated meetings we've had as parents. It's the engagement that they're seeing. They didn't even know we existed until we started making noise. And so if we can just make even that much more noise, then they're going to hear. They're already ready to listen. But if we don't show that there's numbers behind this, why would they work on the infantile FSHD if they think it's going to be only 10 kids? That's not going to make them money. At the end of the day, they need to productize. If they're going to make the investment to do the work on our children, there needs to be a dollar behind it. And if we're all sitting silent and saying, not here, or I'll just wait and I'll see what happens and I'll sit back and let the course take its action, then they're not going to work on the kids because the money's not there. Because at the end of the day, they are a business and we have to show them that we're a united front. And if they build it, we will come. If we don't, then they're not going to build it because it's too expensive.
Right. And so that brings me to my next point. There are a lot of kids that we know that have FSHD that haven't been tested, that are not in anybody's radar. So they're not part of the population. So they can't participate in natural history studies. You know, they're not going to have medical records because they're not seeing doctors. And they are not part of the big population, like Krista said, that this is a big population. They think the numbers are much smaller when we all know the numbers are much, much larger. What our end goal is to find a treatment and get it to the individuals while they're young, while their muscles are still strong, before they have one symptom of FSHD. That's the goal. Look at SMA. They give it to their kids very young, and their kids are still walking now. Their kids were dying, and now their kids are walking and playing soccer. Our kids are suffering, our population is suffering, and we need to get the treatment to them early while their muscles are still strong before they start deteriorating. But we can't do that if people are hiding and they don't want to test their kids, or they don't want to get their kids clinically tested, or they don't want to take them to the doctor. They're not going to get the treatment. Or if they do get the treatment, if we keep hiding, then it's going to be years, and their kids are going to start deteriorating, and our kids that are already deteriorating are going to be even worse, because it's going to be years down the road because we hid and we were afraid to bring this to the forefront and say, my kid has this, I want treatment for it, before they start losing muscle.
Or you're going to get the drug, but you're going to pay a pretty price for it. And so you've got to be extremely wealthy in order to self-fund it.
Right. And there's probably not many people that are going to be able to afford, especially the gene therapies. They're not going to be able to afford millions of dollars.
The Duchenne shot, just one shot, was $3.2 million.
So what we're planning is a grassroots effort to put our kids in front of companies. I'm telling you, the video that we showed them, the couple of videos we did, they had tremendous impact. We plan on making more videos. If we reach out to you and ask you for videos, please submit some videos. If you have a talent in that, if you can edit videos or help us out, please let us know. We also would like to get our kids in front of them. So to travel, if you live near San Diego, where a lot of these biotechs are, or in Boston, Massachusetts, or somewhere near them, we can connect you with them, and then maybe you can go there and your kid will interact with them and visit. You know, they've given like tours of the lab, but it makes such a difference when they actually see someone suffering from the disease, right? So we really want to get some parents and some families to travel there. If we can't travel, at least videotape, help us make these videos so that you create a connection. And that's what they said to me. They're like, we get so stuck in our little scientific world, we forget sometimes the people behind it. And we need to not let them forget the people behind it, that we are real people and that we are really suffering and that we need this treatment. We already talked about a little bit about the voice of the patient and listening session. We are going to do that. It's just a matter of timing. So if we say, okay, now is the time when we need to get in front of the FDA and tell them about our children, then we need you to come. We need a lot of parents to come and tell the story of their kid and how it's affecting them and what they, I don't know exactly what we will probably give them some guidance, June, about the types of things that they want to hear. So we'll be in contact with you, sort of coach you a little bit, or maybe just say some questions that maybe you want to answer to them so that they get a full picture of what the disease is like. When is the onset? How rapidly does it progress? What we expect a treatment to provide to us, right? Like Kristen said, not necessarily get up and running a marathon, but if they could just have more upper mobility or whatever the case may be. So we really need to get that together. And when we reach out, you have to show up. You have to show up in numbers and say, this is important and we need your voice. We also are trying to get a parent advisory committee together. I'm not exactly sure how that's going to work, but when we figure it out, we're going to be reaching out to you to say, hey, you want to be on this parent advisory committee so that you can tell your story about your kid and represent your child in this parent advisory committee to the pharmas. Right now, we really have their attention. And we want to keep the pressure on and the momentum. I want to talk about one more thing about expanded access. And so we talked about off-label. If it goes into phase 3 trial, the pharmaceuticals can do something what's called expanded access. So for all the people who didn't qualify for the initial trial, they can expand that. They will pay for the drug and they will keep gathering data on it. So maybe they could expand it down to kids to 12. Again, under 12, it's a little bit hard because of the toxicology report, but they can expand it down, perhaps down to 12. They can expand it to the non-ambulatory. They could perhaps expand it to people over 65. So it's just like a longer run period where they give you the drug, you take the drug, you report all the data back, and we're really pushing, like I said, it's a two-pronged approach. We want to get our kids in trials, we want to get them the treatment, but before we can do that, the younger kids, before we can do that, we can maybe get the expanded access down to age 12 and to all the other people who are not qualifying for these clinical trials. But we need their voice. They need our voice to say, we want expanded access. Expanded access, your doctor has to request it to the pharma. First, the pharma has to say, we're going to run an expanded access program. So first we have to convince them to do this program. Then your doctor has to request that you go on to this expanded access. Then the last part of it is, while you're in the expanded access, to work the insurance companies, so that while you're on this drug, you're saying, this is working for me, to get the insurance companies to buy in, to pay for it once the expanded access period has ended and the drug is approved by the FDA. You want to stay on that drug, especially if it's helping you, so that your insurance is paying for it. So it gives us a little bit of time while you're getting the treatment to then work with the insurance companies to say, pay for this drug. So we're working on that as well. But again, we need an engaged community to say, this is something that we want. That if they expanded the access down to 12 or they expanded to the non-ambulatory, we will come and we want that treatment. Any questions so far? So I want you to think about ways that you can get involved. If you're not, haven't already been involved, like what talents do you have? What can you bring? How can you help? Can you help us write letters? Can you help us just send in videos? Can you help us with editing? Do you have any project management or science or medical background that you could lend your expertise to us? We have come a long way, and it's mostly been three. It was Kristen and I mostly, and then Debbie came on and helped. Vera came on and helped. We're slowly building, but we need a lot more people to help us, and we need your voice. And when we ask you to show up for these things like parent advisory councils or committees, or a voice of the patient, or we put our feelers out there to say, please complete this survey, that you'll do it. But if you have anything above that that you can contribute, we would welcome you, and we hope that you will join our fight, and that so that we can get expanded access first, and then trials and treatments for the younger kids. Because here's the thing about the expanded access, that is just a US program. Overseas, like in Europe and Australia, they don't have expanded access. They have to get the drug approved for kids. Also, pharmaceuticals have to have a pediatric plan, so to go overseas. So Fulcrum and Avidity, and these are in the later stages, they have to come up with a plan of how they're going to get it into the pediatrics, and they're working on that now. But we can help speed that along by not waiting until they're done with the end of phase 3, then start thinking about the kids, right? Because that's a couple of years down the road. We want to do it now. So if we start working on this now, then by the time that they get into phase 3, hopefully our kids can get into some of those trials, and we can get access to that treatment. We can't wait. We can't wait till they're completely done with all the ambulatory adults before they say, okay, now we're going to start thinking about you. We all know that time is mobility. We all know that we can't wait years, because we'll lose function, and we may never get that function back, and our kids may never get it back. So we need to be very consistent in our message that we can't wait. We need it now. And kids are suffering, and kids are dying. I don't know if you know that, but there are kids that they don't say die from FSHD, but they die from all the symptoms around FSHD, from respiratory or from scoliosis. This isn't something that we can sit back any longer and wait on. We need to be proactive. Any questions, discussions? So you can always contact me at the Early-Onset Chapter at fshdsociety.org. If you want to volunteer, if you have ideas, if you just want to talk about anything, but we really need your help as far as just keeping the momentum going. We would love to get parents and kids into pharmaceuticals. I have a couple questions in the, okay, that's June. We'd love to get kids into the pharmaceuticals and get more videos, but any kind of assistance that you can give us, we would welcome it. The last thing, the video that we put together, it's about a 17 minute long video. It has a lot of different kids in it. It is posted on YouTube. I'm going to get that out to the FSHD Society. It's also on the FSHD Parents Facebook page. Please take a look at that. Look at what we showed to the pharmaceuticals and the researchers, and it really did make an impact on them. And we're going to send it to them, and they plan on showing it to a lot around their companies or whatnot. So I encourage you to go onto YouTube or go onto the FSHD parent site and look at it, and take the time to really listen to what the kids have to say. So next month, Eva Chin from Solve FSHD will be on, and she'll tell us more about her initiatives that we're working with her and with the FSHD Society on trying to move some of these things forward, as far as a retrospective study, initially the outcomes, and then also trying to determine when is the right time to get the voice of the patient together, so that the FDA can hear from the families.